All right, ready to dive into some serious PC tech. Think high-performance gaming, the kind that makes you drool. Whether you're about to build your own rig or just love geeking out on the latest and greatest, this is your personalized deep dive.
And we've got some awesome sources to work with this time. Forum discussions, spec sheets, even some visuals. It's like having a whole team of PC building gurus in your corner.
Exactly, but we're not just going to list off parts, right? We're going deeper, figuring out the why, the strategy behind the build, because a PC like this is like a Formula One car. Every component needs to be perfectly tuned for maximum performance.
Totally. And avoiding those frustrating moments when something doesn't quite fit.
Speaking of high performance, let's talk about the heart of this beast. We've got the Intel Core i9-14900K CPU, and paired with it, the Zotac Gaming GeForce RTX 4080 Super AMP GPU. Those names alone sound like they mean business.
Oh, they absolutely do. The i9-14900K, that's 24 cores. Imagine that. 24 little powerhouses inside your PC, ready for anything. Gaming, streaming, video editing, you name it, it can handle it.
24 cores, wow, okay, color me impressed. But what about that RTX 4080 Super? What does 16 GB of GDDR6X memory actually mean for, us gamers?
Think of it as the ultimate data highway, purpose-built for graphics. Games load crazy fast, those awesome textures render in an instant, and ray tracing, oh man, ray tracing, it makes those virtual worlds come alive.
Okay, now I'm getting excited. But you mentioned something earlier about the motherboard, something about it being super important with components this powerful.
You bet. It's the foundation of your PC. Got to handle all that power these components are drawing, keep them cool, and provide the right connections so everything talks to each other smoothly.
It's like choosing the right power grid for a city, right?
Oh.
Make sure it can handle all the demands. Speaking of motherboards, looks like our sources are really into the Asus ROG Maximus Z790 Hero. What makes this one stand out?
Well, it's built for overclocking right off the bat. Think of overclocking like giving your CPU and GPU a little boost. This board's power delivery system is built to handle that, make sure those components get all the juice they need.
So it's like having a power station built right into the motherboard. But what about cooling? You mentioned that a few times.
Right, yeah, the Z790 Hero does that really well too. Massive heat sinks. Basically, they pull heat away from those critical parts. Plus, lots of options for adding extra fans to keep the air flowing.
Sounds like this motherboard is ready to handle anything. But I noticed our sources mentioned a couple of other options too. The MSI Meg Z790 AC sucks and the Gigabyte Z790 AR US Master. What are the trade-offs there?
Yeah, those are great boards too, each with their own strengths. That MSI board, it's got connections for everything, USB ports galore. And the Gigabyte one, it's bigger, gives you more space to work with if you've got a lot of components or want to add more later.
So it's like choosing between a Swiss Army knife motherboard or one that's more like a spacious workbench. Depends what you're going for. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about memory. RAM speed, does that really matter when you've got a CPU like the i9-14900K?
Oh yeah, definitely. RAM is like your PC's short-term memory. The faster it is, the quicker your CPU can access all the info it needs to keep things running smooth. With a CPU like that i9-14900K, you want RAM that can keep up. Otherwise, you're holding it back.
So like having a super fast assistant who can fetch information in a snap. Our sources seem to recommend DDR5 RAM, somewhere between 6600 and 7200 megahertz. What makes that the sweet spot?
Well, it's a good balance of performance and price. You get a serious speed boost over that older DDR4 RAM, but you're not paying an arm and a leg for those top-tier crazy fast speeds.
Speaking of crazy fast, I saw some mentions of DDR5 8000 RAM. Is that even a real thing?
It is, but compatibility can be a bit tricky at those speeds. Not every motherboard can handle it reliably, and for most people, the performance gains might not even be noticeable.
So sticking to that 6600 to 7200 megahertz range sounds like the smart move. Any specific recommendations from the sources?
They really like the G-Skill Trident Z5 RGB and the Team Group T-Force Extreme DDR5. Both offer great performance, and they've got good overclocking potential too.
Ooh, overclocking RAM? Is that a thing? Like overclocking the CPU?
Yeah, it's similar. And that's where those XMP 3.0 profiles come in handy. They're basically pre-configured overclocking settings tested by the RAM manufacturer. You just enable the profile in your BIOS, that's like your PC's control panel, and boom, your RAM is running at its best. Super easy.
Okay, that sounds way less scary than I thought. But we've got all these power-hungry components. What about the unsung hero of any PC build? the power supply.
You're right, the PSU, it often gets overlooked. It's the heart of your PC, pumping power to everything. With a system like this, especially with that RTX 4080 Super Drawing 320W, you need a solid, reliable PSU, no question.
So how do we pick a PSU that can handle all this power? I don't want my PC suddenly shutting down in the middle of a game.
For a build like this, the sources recommend at least 850W. 1000W gives you some extra headroom and future-proofing. It's always better to have a bit more power than you need.
Right. Wouldn't want my PC to go kaput at a crucial moment. Anything else we should be looking for in a PSU?
The efficiency ratings are important. Look for at least 80 PLUS gold. Think of it like fuel efficiency in a car. A gold-rated PSU converts more of that power into usable energy, less wasted as heat.
So it's not just about raw power, it's about quality and efficiency too. Now all this power has got to generate some heat, right? What's the best way to keep this thing from overheating?
You got it. We're potentially talking about a system pulling around 1200 W under load. So yeah, good cooling is a must.
So what kind of cooling system can handle that? Any recommendations from the sources?
Well, they didn't get into specific products. They gave more general advice. Find a cooling solution that matches your total wattage and take your room size into account. A small room with a heat-generating PC like this might need a more powerful solution.
So it's not just the PC itself, it's the environment it's in too. What are the different ways to go about cooling? I've heard of air cooling and liquid cooling, but not really sure what the difference is.
There are two main approaches. You got it. Air cooling, that's the more traditional way. Heat sinks and fans to dissipate heat. Kind of like a car's radiator, using air to pull heat away from the engine.
Okay, that makes sense. So air cooling is probably simpler, more affordable. What about liquid cooling? When would you recommend that?
Liquid cooling, that's like having a tiny plumbing system in your PC. It uses a closed loop with a radiator, pump, and coolant to move heat away from the components. Can be more effective than air cooling, especially for high-performance systems like this. Allows for higher overclocking, can be quieter, but it's generally more expensive, a bit more complicated to install.
So air cooling is like the trusty old pickup truck,
Yeah.
and liquid cooling is the high-performance sports car.
Got it. Exactly. What's best for you depends on your budget, what you want to achieve, and how much noise you can handle. But before we get too deep into cooling, let's talk cases.
Welcome back to our PC building deep dive.
Yeah.
Last time we got into the nitty-gritty of the CPU, GPU, motherboard, RAM, even the power supply. Now it's time to talk about the things that bring it all together, literally. The case, storage, all those little details that make your build truly yours.
Yeah, this is where it starts to feel real, doesn't it? We've got the engine, the fuel, now we need to pick the perfect chassis for it all. Figure out where we're going to store all those games.
Exactly. And one of the first things we got to consider is the case. Our sources seem to love the Lee Enlai PC11 Dynamic EVO. It's a popular choice.
I've seen that one. It's gorgeous. All that tempered glass, showing off the components like a work of art. What makes it so good for a build like this?
Well, it's super spacious, for one. It's got this dual chamber design, so everything has its place. Motherboard, graphics card, power supply, they all get their own little compartment. Makes cable management a breeze and helps with airflow too. So it's like a luxury apartment for your PC parts. But case choice is a bit personal, isn't it? What if someone wants a different look or have a tighter budget?
Oh, totally. There are tons of cases out there, something for every taste and budget. If you're looking for something smaller, more affordable, the NZXT H510 Flow is a good option. Still has great airflow, can handle powerful components, but won't take up your whole desk.
So many choices. Okay, before we go full-on case shopping spree, let's talk storage. I mean, what's a gaming TC without a massive library of games?
Right. Gotta have space for all those games. And for this build, the sources recommend the Samsung 990 Pro 2TB NVMe PCIe 4.0 SSD. Get ready for some serious speed.
Okay, I'm all ears. What makes this SSD so special?
This is a top-of-the-line SSD. Uses NVMe technology. It basically talks directly to your CPU way faster than those older SATA hard drives. It's like having a dedicated express lane on the highway just for your game data.
So no more waiting around for games to load.
Pretty much. Instant gaming gratification.
2PB is a lot, but some of these games these days are huge. What if you need even more space?
You're right, 2TB might not be enough for everyone, especially if you've got a massive game library. You could always add another SSD, a bigger one. Or if you're on a budget and don't mind slightly slower loading times for some files, a regular hard drive can be a good way to add more space.
So it's like having different tiers of storage. The SSD for your most played games, those need to load super fast. And then the hard drive for everything else.
Exactly. Finding the right balance of speed, capacity, and budget. But let's not forget about the fun stuff, the details that add personality. We talked cooling, but what about aesthetics?
Oh yeah, got to make it look good. What options do we have?
So many. RGB lighting is huge these days. Motherboards, RAM, even graphics cards come with it. Imagine your whole PC lit up, changing colors with your games or music.
Now that's just cool. Like a mini light show inside your case.
Yeah.
Anything else we can do to personalize it?
Oh, yeah. Get creative with custom cables, fan grills, even little figures to put inside. Some people go all out with custom paint jobs or water cooling loops with colored coolant. Make it your own.
It's like turning your PC into a work of art. But before we get carried away with RGB rainbows and decorations, what about the less glamorous stuff? Operating system, drivers, all that.
Right. Gotta have the software side covered, too. It's like having a powerful car, but forgetting to put gas in it.
So what kind of gas are we talking about here? What operating system should we install?
For gaming, Windows 10 or 11 are usually the best bet. They work great with pretty much every game and hardware, and they're constantly being updated.
So Windows is like the all-purpose fuel for gaming PCs. But what if someone wants to try something different, like Linux? Is that even an option for gaming these days?
Linux has come a long way for gaming. There are even versions of Linux made just for gaming, like SteamOS. It's definitely an option, especially if you like to tinker and customize.
So Linux is like the high-octane fuel for the more adventurous PC builders.
Yeah, it can give you more control, but it might be a bit harder to learn for some people. It all comes down to your comfort level and what features you need.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Cases, storage, even operating systems. It's amazing how all these pieces come together to create a unique PC building experience, isn't it?
It really is. We started with a bunch of parts, and now we're talking aesthetics, software, personal preferences. Building a PC is so much more than just putting parts together. It's about expressing your creativity, your style, your love for technology.
I totally agree. It's a journey of discovery, learning, and creation. But hold on tight, because in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to walk you through the actual building process, step by step. All right, time to put all this knowledge to work. We've talked about the parts, the case, the storage, even the software. Now let's actually build this thing, ready to bring this high-performance gaming PC to life.
I'm ready. It's like we've been talking about the menu, and now it's time to cook. But before we get our hands dirty, let's talk tools and some prep tips that'll make the build go smoother.
Okay, what kind of tools are we talking about?
You'll definitely need some good screwdrivers. Phillips head and flathead, those are must-haves.
Right, wouldn't want to strip any of those tiny screws.
Exactly. And an anti-static wrist strap. That's important. Helps prevent accidental damage from static electricity, like wearing rubber gloves when you're working with electricity.
So it's like a safety net for precious components.
Bro.
What else?
A decent pair of pliers can be handy for those tricky cable connections, when things are tight. And a good headlamp or flashlight. Trust me, you'll be glad you have one when you're digging around inside that case.
Okay, tools assembled. What about the workspace?
You want a nice, clean, well-lit area. Think like a surgeon's operating room. Clear off a good space on a table, maybe one that's not carpeted, to minimize static.
So good lighting, clean space, maybe some pump-up music.
Yeah, whatever gets you in the zone. Now, the first step, the sources recommend starting with the motherboard. Installing the CPU, RAM, and cooler onto the motherboard outside of the case. Gives you more room to work, makes things easier.
So it's like building the engine before putting it in the car. But installing a CPU, that sounds kind of intimidating. Any tips for avoiding, like, bending a pin or something?
CPUs and motherboards these days, they're designed to be a bit easier to work with, but yeah, be gentle. Make sure everything's lined up properly. It's like a tiny puzzle. Line up that arrow or notch on the CPU with the mark on the socket. Then gently lower it into place. Don't force it.
Okay, feeling a bit more confident now. So CPU's in. What's next? The RAM.
Got it. RAM's pretty straightforward, but make sure that notch on the RAM stick lines up with the notch in the slot. Like plugging in a USB drive, it only goes in one way. Push down on both ends until you hear that click.
Click. RAM installed. CPU cooler. Does that go on before we put the motherboard in the case?
Yep, that's right. Installing the cooler, it kind of depends on what temp you've got, but the main thing is good contact between the cooler and the CPU. So a little bit of thermal paste on top of the CPU before you attach the cooler.
Oh, the thermal paste. I've heard horror stories about putting on too much or not enough. Is there a trick to getting it just right?
Lots of techniques out there, but the key is a thin, even layer spread across the whole CPU. You don't want any air bubbles trapped in there. That'll mess up the heat transfer.
So a little dab will do ya. Okay, cooler's on. Time to move on to the case, right?
Now comes the fun part, carefully moving that motherboard assembly into the case. Screwing it into the standoffs, those are the little metal posts that lift the motherboard off the case floor. Then, connecting all the cables, take your time with this, double check everything.
It's like PC surgery. And cable management, that's super important here, right?
Mm.
Don't want my beautiful build to turn into a tangled mess of wires.
Cable management, it's not just about looks, it helps with airflow too. Keeps everything running cool and smooth. Use cable ties, Velcro straps, whatever helps you keep those cables organized.
So we're turning a jungle of wires into a well-organized garden. Once everything's connected, it's time for the moment of truth. The first boot.
The moment we've been waiting for, like starting up a brand new car for the first time.
Fingers crossed, everything lights up. But before we celebrate, what about the BIOS? You mentioned checking the BIOS settings. What are we looking for?
The BIOS, it's like your PC's control center. You can adjust all sorts of settings in there, make sure the CPU, RAM, and storage are all being detected correctly. You can adjust fan speeds, boot order, all sorts of things.
So it's like fine-tuning the engine after you've built it. BIOS is all set. Time for the final step, installing the operating system.
That's right. Use a bootable USB drive or DVD to install the OS you've chosen. And once that's done, don't forget the drivers, especially for the GPU.
Drivers, drivers, drivers. We've said it a million times, but it's important, right?
Super important. Drivers are like the translators between your hardware and software. Make sure they can talk to each other. Outdated drivers can cause all sorts of problems, slowdowns, crashes, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so we've built the hardware, installed the software. Hopefully everything went smoothly. Time to install some games and put this beast through its paces.
It's time to game. This is what it's all been leading up to. Enjoy those smooth frame rates, the incredible graphics, the responsiveness.
I can almost hear those fans spinning up already. But before we get lost in gaming land, any parting words of wisdom for our listeners who are about to start their own PC building adventures?
Building a PC, it's really something special. It's about taking control of your tech, understanding how it works, making it your own. It can be a challenge, but the reward, a PC that's uniquely yours, is totally worth it.
Absolutely. The world of PC tech is always changing, so stay curious, keep learning, and never stop exploring. Congrats to everyone who's followed along on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and that you're feeling inspired to build your own dream machines.
Yeah, and most importantly, have fun. Building a PC is a creative, rewarding experience. Embrace the challenge, learn from any mistakes you make, and enjoy creating something awesome.
That's a wrap on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those PCs running smooth, those games loading fast, and your passion for tech burning bright.